The glow from the computer screen painted shadows across Keisha's face as her fingers moved across the keyboard like a pianist playing her final song. She had exactly 12 minutes before Mr. Richardson returned from his evening jog, 12 minutes to finish what she'd been working on for months in secret. The lines of code scrolled down the screen, each one a piece of her heart she'd poured into this project during stolen moments when the house was quiet. The sound of the front door slamming shut made her blood freeze. Heavy footsteps echoed through the marble hallway, much earlier than expected. Panic shot through her chest like lightning. She could hear him calling out, his voice carrying that edge it got when something was wrong. Her hands shook as she tried to save her work, but the computer seemed to move in slow motion. Everything she'd built, everything she'd dreamed of, was about to be discovered in the worst possible way. Keisha. His voice was closer now, moving toward his home office where she sat surrounded by the evidence of her secret life. The life nobody knew about, the life that could change everything or destroy it all. She could run. She could pretend she was just cleaning. She could lie like she'd been lying for months. But as Daniel Richardson appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his dark eyes taking in the scene before him, Keisha knew her time was up. The look on his face shifted from confusion to anger to something she couldn't quite read. His gaze moved from her to the computer screen, and she watched as his expression changed completely. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the computer and her heart beating so loud she was sure he could hear it. Daniel Richardson, one of the most powerful tech billionaires in Atlanta, stood frozen as he stared at the screen. The anger that had flashed across his face was replaced by something else entirely: shock, maybe even awe. "What is this?" he whispered, stepping closer to get a better look at her work. Keisha's throat felt like sandpaper. This was it. This was where her life changed forever, one way or another. She'd been cleaning houses since she was 16, working multiple jobs to support her grandmother and little sister. Nobody knew about her other life, the one where she stayed up until 3 in the morning teaching herself programming languages, where she dreamed of creating something that mattered. "I can explain," she started, but her voice came out smaller than she intended. Daniel moved closer to the computer, his eyes scanning the code with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. Keisha had been working as his housekeeper for 8 months, invisible in the way domestic workers often were to wealthy people. She cleaned his mansion 3 times a week, did his laundry, organized his life, and listened to him take business calls about problems she knew she could solve if only she had the chance. But chances weren't given to people like her. Chances had to be taken. The project on the screen represented months of her life. She'd been using his computer during her lunch breaks and after finishing her cleaning duties, always careful to cover her tracks. She'd built something beautiful, something revolutionary, something that could help millions of people. And now he'd caught her red-handed. "This is," Daniel paused, scrolling through more of her code. "This is incredible." Those weren't the words Keisha expected to hear. She'd prepared herself for anger, for accusations, for being fired and possibly sued. She hadn't prepared for the wonder in his voice. "You wrote this?" he asked, turning to look at her directly for what felt like the first time since she'd started working for him. Keisha straightened her shoulders. She was 24 years old, a brilliant programmer who happened to clean houses to pay the bills. She was tired of being invisible. "Yes, sir, I wrote every line." Daniel shook his head slowly, still staring at the screen. "This could revolutionize how we approach data security in healthcare systems. The algorithm you've created here, it's genius-level work. Where did you learn to code like this?" The question hung in the air between them. How could she explain that she'd taught herself using free online courses and library computers? That she'd spent her teenage years at the public library instead of hanging out with friends, because it was the only place she could access reliable internet? That every book on programming she'd ever owned had been bought used or borrowed? "I taught myself," she said simply. Something shifted in Daniel's expression. For the first time since she'd known him, he really looked at her, not through her or around her, but at her. Keisha felt exposed under his gaze, but also strangely hopeful. "We need to talk," he said finally. "Not here, not like this. Can you come in tomorrow morning early?" Keisha nodded, not trusting her voice to stay steady. She saved her work and closed the computer, acutely aware that her whole life had just changed in the span of 5 minutes. As she gathered her things to leave, Daniel called her name. Keisha, she turned back to face him. What you've built here, it's not just good, it's extraordinary. Walking home to the small apartment she shared with her grandmother and sister, Keisha's mind raced with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight brought questions that kept her staring at the ceiling until dawn. She had no idea that her secret discovery was about to unlock doors she'd never dreamed of walking through. Keisha arrived at Daniel's house at 7 in the morning, her hands still shaking from a sleepless night of wondering what today would bring. She'd told her grandmother she might be late getting home, but she hadn't explained why. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? Daniel answered the door personally, which had never happened before. Usually, she let herself in through the service entrance and began her work without seeing him at all. Today, he led her to his living room, a space she'd cleaned hundreds of times but never sat in. Coffee, he offered, and the normalcy of the question felt strange given the circumstances. Thank you, she replied, settling carefully on the edge of his leather sofa. When he returned with 2 mugs, Daniel sat across from her rather than towering above her, and somehow that small gesture made the conversation feel less like an interrogation and more like, well, she wasn't sure what it felt like. I spent most of the night going through your code, he began. I hope you don't mind, but I had my team look at it too, without revealing who wrote it, of course. Keisha's stomach clenched. She'd expected him to be impressed, maybe even interested, but involving his team felt bigger than she'd anticipated. What did they say? She asked. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. They said it was some of the most innovative work they'd seen in years. The way you've approached the encryption protocols, it's not just elegant, it's revolutionary. Keisha, this could change everything about how sensitive data is protected. The words washed over her like warm sunlight. For so long she'd worked in isolation, never knowing if what she was creating was actually good or just the desperate dreams of someone who wanted more from life. I want to offer you a job, Daniel continued. Not just any job. I want you to lead the development of this project. Full-time, with a team, with resources, with everything you need to make this vision a reality. Keisha set down her coffee mug with trembling hands. Mr. Richardson, I don't have a computer science degree. I don't have any degree. I'm not even sure I'm qualified to. Stop, he interrupted gently. What you've created proves your qualifications better than any piece of paper ever could. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. She nodded, preparing herself for the question that would determine her future. Why were you using my computer? I'm not angry, he added quickly, seeing her expression. I just need to understand. Keisha took a deep breath. This was the part where she had to trust him with her truth. I've been teaching myself to code since I was 15, she began. My grandmother raised me and my little sister after our parents died in a car accident. Money was always tight and college wasn't an option. But I've always been good with computers, and I knew technology was where I wanted to be. She paused, gathering courage to continue. I've been working multiple jobs since high school, cleaning houses, waiting tables, doing whatever I could to help support my family. When I started working here, I noticed you had all these advanced systems, and I could see problems with them that I knew how to fix. At first, I just wanted to understand how they worked. Then I started experimenting during my breaks. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. I know I should have asked permission, Keisha continued, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd say no, afraid you'd fire me, afraid you'd think I was overstepping. People don't usually take housekeepers seriously when they talk about computer programming. That's going to change, Daniel said firmly. At least in this company, that's going to change right now. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the city skyline. Keisha, I built this company because I believe technology should solve real problems for real people. What you've created does exactly that. I don't care where you learned it or how you learned it. I care that you can do it and do it brilliantly. He turned back to face her. But I need you to know what you're saying yes to. This isn't just about you anymore. If we move forward with this project, you'll be in meetings with executives, presenting to investors, working with teams of engineers who might question your credentials. Are you ready for that? Keisha thought about her grandmother, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, and still made sure Keisha and her sister did their homework every night. She thought about her little sister Jasmine, who was now a senior in high school with dreams of becoming a doctor. She thought about all the nights she'd stayed up coding while the rest of the world slept, believing in something she couldn't even name. Yes, she said, I'm ready. Daniel smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Then let's talk about what comes next. They spent the next 3 hours discussing the technical aspects of her project, and Keisha found herself amazed by how easily the conversation flowed. Daniel asked intelligent questions and offered insights that pushed her thinking in new directions. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone truly understood the work she was passionate about. There's one more thing, Daniel said as their meeting was winding down. I'd like you to present this project to our board of directors next week. If they approve it, and I think they will be looking at a significant investment to bring this to market. Keisha's head spun. A week ago she was a housekeeper with a secret. Now she was potentially about to present to a board of directors. What about my current job? She asked. I mean, I still need to work while. Keisha, Daniel interrupted with a laugh. You're not going to be cleaning houses anymore. Your starting salary will be more than enough to support your family. In fact, it'll probably be more than you've made in the past 3 years combined. As she walked home that afternoon, Keisha felt like she was floating. But alongside the excitement was a thread of fear. Could she really do this? Could someone like her succeed in a world she'd only ever observed from the outside? That evening, she finally told her grandmother and sister what had happened. Their reactions would stay with her forever. You did what? Grandma Pearl's voice rose 3 octaves as she set down her glass of sweet tea with such force that it sloshed onto the kitchen table. Keisha had been dreading this conversation all day. Her grandmother was a practical woman who'd lived through enough disappointment to be suspicious of anything that sounded too good to be true. And this definitely sounded too good to be true. Grandma, please just listen. Baby girl, you're telling me that you've been sneaking around using that man's computer, and now he wants to give you some fancy job. Pearl's weathered hands gestured emphatically as she spoke. That sounds like trouble to me. Jasmine looked up from her homework at the kitchen table, her eyes wide with curiosity. At 17, she was the dreamer in the family, always believing the best was possible even when evidence suggested otherwise. What kind of job? Jasmine asked, closing her chemistry textbook. Keisha sat down at the table, taking her grandmother's hands in hers. Grandma, remember when I was little and I used to take apart everything electronic in the house? Remember how I fixed Mrs. Johnson's computer when the repair shop said it couldn't be saved? Pearl's expression softened slightly. She did remember. She remembered finding a 7-year-old Keisha surrounded by the pieces of an old radio, putting it back together like it was a puzzle. She remembered the nights Keisha spent at the library, coming home with books about computers that Pearl couldn't even pronounce the titles of. I've been learning to write computer programs for years, Keisha continued. All those late nights when you thought I was just staying up too late, I was studying. I was building something, and now that something might help people all over the world. She pulled out her phone and showed them the basic interface she'd created for her security program. This could protect people's medical information from hackers. It could keep their personal data safe. And Mr. Richardson thinks it's good enough to turn into a real business. Jasmine leaned in closer, her eyes bright with excitement. Keisha, this is incredible. You built this yourself. Every piece of it. Pearl was quiet for a long moment, studying her granddaughter's face. What does this mean for us? She asked finally. I'm not getting any younger, and Jasmine's got college to think about. We can't afford to take risks right now. It was a fair question, and one Keisha had been asking herself all day. It means everything changes, she said honestly. The salary Mr. Richardson is offering, it's enough to pay off your medical bills from last year. It's enough to make sure Jasmine can go to any college she wants without worrying about student loans. It's enough for us to move out of this apartment and into a real house." Pearl's eyes filled with tears. She'd been carrying the weight of those medical bills like a stone in her chest, working double shifts at the hospital cafeteria even though her arthritis made every step painful. The idea that her granddaughter might be able to lift that burden felt too miraculous to believe. "But what if it doesn't work out?" Pearl asked. "What if you get in over your head? Baby, you've never worked in an office before. You don't know how these business people operate." Keisha had wondered the same thing. "Then I'll figure it out, just like I figured out how to code, just like I figured out how to keep this family together when I was barely an adult myself." The strength in her voice surprised all three of them. Keisha had always been the quiet one, the one who worked hard without complaining, who solved problems without asking for credit. But something had changed in her during that conversation with Daniel. She'd found her voice. "Besides," she added with a small smile, "I'll still be the same person who grew up in this apartment with you. Success doesn't change where you come from." Jasmine reached across the table and grabbed her sister's hand. "I'm proud of you, Keisha. I'm proud that you never gave up on your dreams, even when it seemed impossible." "What dreams?" Keisha asked, confused. "You think I didn't know?" Jasmine laughed. "You think I didn't see you sneaking to use the computer at the library? You think I didn't notice all those programming books hidden under your bed? I've been watching you chase this dream for years, even when you probably didn't realize it was a dream." Pearl wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Lord knows I've prayed for a miracle for this family. I just never expected it to come in the form of my granddaughter being a computer genius." "I'm not a genius, Grandma, I just work hard." "Same thing, baby girl. Same thing." That night, after Jasmine had gone to bed and Pearl was settled in her recliner watching her evening shows, Keisha sat on her small bed looking around the room she'd called home for the past 8 years. The walls were covered with notes and diagrams she'd drawn while working through programming problems. Her small desk was stacked with library books and printed articles she'd found online. This room had been her sanctuary, her classroom, her laboratory. Soon, she'd have a real office, a real team, real resources to build something that mattered. But she'd never forget the nights she spent in this room, teaching herself to dream bigger than her circumstances. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Board meeting scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. Are you ready to change the world?" Keisha looked around her room one more time, then typed back, "I've been ready my whole life." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Daniel connected her with a presentation coach and provided her with professional clothes for the board meeting. But more importantly, he treated her like a colleague rather than an employee, asking for her input on strategy and listening carefully to her ideas. On Wednesday night, the night before the biggest day of her life, Keisha couldn't sleep. She found her grandmother sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea as if she'd been waiting for her. "Nervous?" Pearl asked. "Terrified," Keisha admitted. Pearl nodded knowingly. "Good, that means it matters to you. But baby, let me tell you something your grandfather used to say. You can't be great from your comfort zone. Tomorrow, you step out of everything comfortable and familiar. But you're ready for it." "How do you know?" Pearl smiled, reaching out to touch her granddaughter's face. "Because I raised you to be ready for anything. Because you've got your mother's heart and your father's mind, and together those things are unstoppable. And because tomorrow, you're not just representing yourself, you're representing every person who's ever been told they're not good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough to sit at the big table." As Keisha finally drifted off to sleep that night, she carried her grandmother's words with her. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Keisha stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the blazer Daniel had helped her pick out, and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked professional, confident, ready for anything even if she didn't quite feel it yet. The Richardson Tech Building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in downtown Atlanta, and as Keisha walked through the lobby for the first time as something other than hired help, she felt the weight of how much her life had changed in just 1 week. Daniel met her at the elevator, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an encouraging smile. "Ready for this?" As ready as I'll ever be, she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. As they rode up to the 20th floor, Daniel gave her a final pep talk. Remember, these people are smart, but they're also business people. They care about results, about potential, about what your project can do for the company and for the world. You know this technology better than anyone in that room. Trust yourself. The boardroom was intimidating, all polished wood and floor, to ceiling windows, with a view of the entire city. 12 people sat around the massive conference table, and as Keisha entered, she felt their eyes assessing her. She was the youngest person in the room by at least 15 years, the only black woman, and definitely the only one who'd been cleaning offices instead of running them just a week ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, "I'd like you to meet Keisha Washington, the brilliant mind behind the security protocol I've been telling you about." The introductions were polite but reserved. These were people who'd seen countless presentations from countless hopeful entrepreneurs. They were friendly but skeptical, interested but cautious. But when Keisha began to speak, something magical happened. "Imagine your grandmother goes to the hospital," she started, abandoning the formal opening she'd rehearsed. "She's got diabetes, high blood pressure, and she's worried about the costs. She gives the nurse her social security number, her insurance information, her entire medical history. She trusts that this information will be safe." The room was completely quiet, everyone focused on her words. But right now, that information is vulnerable. Hackers steal medical records every day because the current security systems have fundamental flaws that most people don't even realize exist. She moved to the presentation screen, her confidence growing with each word. "What I've built is different. It doesn't just protect the data, it makes it nearly impossible to steal in the first place." For the next 30 minutes, Keisha walked them through her innovation, explaining complex technical concepts in ways that made sense to everyone in the room. She showed them how her system would work, what problems it would solve, and why it was better than anything currently on the market. But more than that, she showed them her passion. This wasn't just a business opportunity for her, it was a chance to protect people like her grandmother, people who trusted the system to keep them safe. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the questions began. "How do you know this will scale to handle millions of users? What's your plan for dealing with competitors who will inevitably try to copy this approach? What makes you think you can lead a development team when you don't have management experience?" The questions came fast and sharp, but Keisha was ready for them. She'd spent days thinking through every possible concern, every potential problem, every reason they might say no. Her answers were detailed, thoughtful, and confident. The last question came from Margaret Chen, the company's chief technology officer and the one person whose approval would carry the most weight. "Keisha, I have to ask, you've created something remarkable here, but you've done it in isolation. How do we know you can collaborate with a team? How do we know you can handle the pressure of deadlines, investor meetings, and all the challenges that come with turning a prototype into a commercial product?" It was a fair question, and Keisha had been expecting it. She took a breath before answering. "Ms. Chen, you're right that I haven't worked in a corporate environment before, but I have experience with pressure, with deadlines, and with collaboration. It just looks different from what you might expect." She gestured toward the presentation screen. "Every line of code I showed you today was written during stolen moments between jobs, on borrowed computers, with help from online communities of programmers I've never met in person. I've been collaborating with people all over the world, learning from them, contributing to their projects, building relationships based on shared knowledge rather than corporate hierarchies." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "As for pressure and deadlines, I've been supporting my family since I was 18 years old. I've worked multiple jobs while teaching myself skills that most people learn in 4-year degree programs. I've never missed a rent payment, never let my grandmother go without her medications, never let my sister doubt that she could achieve anything she set her mind to." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each board member. "I understand that managing a development team will be different from managing my family's finances or my own education. But the core skills are the same: clear communication, careful planning, dedication to excellence, and never giving up when things get difficult. Margaret Chen smiled, the first genuine smile Keisha had seen from anyone in the room. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Daniel leaned forward. The floor is open for discussion. What followed was the longest 30 minutes of Keisha's life. She sat quietly while 12 of the most powerful people in the tech industry debated her future, her project, and her potential. Some voices were enthusiastic, others cautious. Some saw opportunity, others saw risk. Finally, Margaret Chen called for a vote. All in favor of moving forward with the Washington Security Protocol project, with Keisha Washington as lead developer and project manager. Hands went up around the table. Not all of them, but enough, more than enough. Motion carries, Margaret announced. Welcome to Richardson Tech, Ms. Washington, let's change the world. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of congratulations, logistics discussions, and planning conversations. Keisha found herself agreeing to start dates, salary figures, and project timelines that felt surreal. As the board members filed out, each stopping to shake her hand and offer encouragement, Daniel remained behind with her. How does it feel? He asked. Keisha sank into one of the leather chairs, suddenly exhausted. Overwhelming, exciting, terrifying, like I'm dreaming and might wake up any second. You're not dreaming, Daniel assured her. You earned this. Every single person in this room knows that what you've built is extraordinary. Now we get to help you make it even better. That evening, Keisha walked into her family's apartment to find Pearl and Jasmine waiting in the living room with a small celebration cake and balloons. Well, Jasmine asked before Keisha had even closed the door. Keisha's smile said everything they needed to know. Her grandmother burst into tears, Jasmine started jumping up and down, and for the first time in weeks, Keisha let herself fully believe that this was really happening. I start Monday, she announced. And the first thing I'm doing is making sure Jasmine's college applications get sent to every school she's ever dreamed of attending. As they sat around their small kitchen table sharing cake and dreams, Keisha realized that the best part wasn't the job or the money or even the recognition. The best part was knowing that she'd been right to believe in herself, even when no one else could see what she was building. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was for celebrating how far they'd all come. 6 months later, Keisha stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office, watching the Atlanta skyline sparkle in the morning sun. The nameplate on her door read, Keisha Washington, Director of Data Security Innovation, and even after all this time, she still felt a small thrill every time she saw it. Her team had grown to 12 brilliant engineers, and together they'd refined her original concept into something even more powerful than she'd initially imagined. The Washington Security Protocol was being tested by 3 major hospital systems, and early results showed it was performing better than anyone had dared hope. But success hadn't come without challenges. There had been late nights when nothing seemed to work right, team meetings where her ideas were questioned by people with decades more experience, and moments when the imposter syndrome whispered that she didn't belong in this world of glass offices and quarterly projections. The turning point had come 3 months ago, during a particularly difficult week when a competitor had announced a similar product, and the board was wondering if they should pivot to something else entirely. Keisha had called an all-hands meeting and spoken from her heart about why this project mattered, not just as a business opportunity, but as a way to protect vulnerable people from having their most private information stolen and misused. Her team had rallied around that vision, working overtime to add features and improvements that made their system not just different from the competition, but clearly superior. It was then that Keisha realized she wasn't just a good programmer, she was a good leader. Now, as she prepared for the biggest presentation of her career, she felt the familiar mix of nerves and excitement that had become her constant companion. Today she would present their finished product to the board, but this time with data, testimonials, and proof that her vision could work in the real world. Knock, knock, came a familiar voice from her doorway. Keisha turned to see Daniel holding 2 cups of coffee, a ritual that had continued even after their professional relationship had evolved into something closer to friendship and mentorship. The usual pre-presentation jitters, he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. More like pre-presentation excitement, Keisha replied, surprising herself with how true that was. I can't wait to show them what we've built. Daniel smiled. That's growth. 6 months ago you were terrified of that boardroom, now you're eager to get back in there. 6 months ago, I had an idea and a lot of hope. Today I have proof. They talked through the presentation one final time, but Keisha barely needed the practice. She knew every aspect of the project by heart, had lived with it through late nights and early mornings, had seen it evolve from lines of code into something that was already making a difference in people's lives. An hour later, she stood in the same boardroom where her life had changed, but this time she felt completely at home. The 12 faces around the table were familiar now colleagues who'd become invested in her success and the success of her project. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, 6 months ago I asked you to take a chance on an idea. Today I'm here to show you what that idea has become. The presentation was flawless. She walked them through test results that exceeded their most optimistic projections, showed them testimonials from doctors and patients who'd benefited from the enhanced security, and outlined a roadmap for expansion that would bring the technology to healthcare systems across the country. But the moment that meant the most came when she clicked to a slide that showed a photograph of her grandmother. This is Pearl Washington, she said. She's 73 years old, has been dealing with diabetes for 15 years, and last month she was one of the first patients to benefit from our security protocol when she was treated at Grady Hospital. The room was completely silent, everyone focused on her words. She didn't know that her granddaughter had created the system protecting her medical records. She just knew that she felt safe giving her information to the nurses, that she trusted the hospital to keep her data secure. That's what success looks like to me, not the technical metrics or the market projections, but the knowledge that we're protecting people who trust the system to keep them safe. When she finished, the applause was immediate and sustained. But more than that, she could see genuine emotion on the faces around the table. These successful, powerful people were moved by what she'd accomplished. Margaret Chen was the first to speak. Keisha, what you've built here goes beyond impressive. It's transformative. The board is prepared to approve a full commercial rollout, with a development budget that will allow you to expand your team and accelerate deployment to healthcare systems nationwide. The number that followed made Keisha's head spin. It was more money than she'd ever imagined, resources that would allow her to hire the best programmers in the industry and build something truly revolutionary. But even more meaningful were the words that came next. We're also recommending you for promotion to Vice President of Innovation, Margaret continued. This company was built on the principle that great ideas can come from anywhere, and you've proven that principle in the most spectacular way possible. The meeting that followed was a celebration disguised as a business discussion. Contract negotiations, timeline planning, and strategic discussions that would have overwhelmed her 6 months ago now felt like natural extensions of work she was passionate about. As the board members filed out, each stopping to congratulate her personally, Keisha felt the profound satisfaction of a dream not just achieved, but exceeded. That evening, her family gathered in the new house Keisha had bought in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and a big backyard where Pearl could grow the vegetable garden she'd always wanted. Jasmine was home from her first semester at Spelman College, full of stories about her pre-med classes and dreams of becoming a doctor. So, Pearl said as they sat around the dinner table, what's next for our resident genius? Keisha laughed. Next, we change the world, for real this time. You already changed our world, Jasmine pointed out. Remember when our biggest worry was whether we could afford groceries. Now I'm at my dream school, Grandma's got the best healthcare in the city, and you're running a department at a major tech company. That's not the change I'm talking about, Keisha said. That's just the beginning. She looked around the table at the two people who'd believed in her before she'd even believed in herself, who'd supported her dreams when they seemed impossible, who'd celebrated her successes as if they were their own. I'm talking about showing other people like us that there's room for them in spaces where they've never been welcomed before. I'm talking about creating opportunities for people who are brilliant but don't have access to the right schools or the right connections. I'm talking about building something that lasts longer than any of us will. Pearl reached across the table and took her granddaughter's hand. Baby girl, you've already done that. Every time someone sees a young black woman leading a team of engineers, every time someone hears your story and realizes their own dreams might be possible, every time you walk into that boardroom and remind those people that talent comes from everywhere, you're changing the world. Later that night, Keisha sat on her back porch looking up at the stars, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From stolen moments on borrowed computers to leading a team of world-class engineers. From wondering if she could afford groceries to wondering how she could use her success to help others. Her phone buzzed with a message from one of her engineers. Just saw the news about your promotion. Can't wait to see what we build next. Keisha smiled and typed back, "We're just getting started." As she sat there in the quiet of her own backyard, in the house she'd bought with money from work she loved, surrounded by a family whose dreams were coming true alongside her own, Keisha realized that the best part of her story wasn't where it ended, it was knowing that it was really just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that great ideas really could come from anywhere. But tonight was for gratitude, for celebrating how far she'd come, and for dreaming about how far she could still go. In the distance, the lights of Atlanta sparkled like stars, and Keisha Washington, former housekeeper, self-taught programmer, and now vice president of innovation, began planning her next impossible dream.